Hey all, today we're going to start a new unit and we are going to talk about right triangles. And we're going to start that by talking about the Pythagorean Theorem. I spelled this wrong. There should be an A in there. We've talked about the Pythagorean Theorem a bunch this year. If you remember, it's the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. It is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And that C, that is one of the sides, is always the hypotenuse, the longest side. And so we've used this to find distance, and we could also use it to apply it to finding a missing side in a right triangle, and that's what we're going to do here today. So I have this right triangle here. I know two of the sides, and I want to find this missing side, x. And so first thing I want to do is I want to establish which side is the hypotenuse, because that's going to go in for C into my formula. Well, the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. There's the right angle. So 16, that's going to be my hypotenuse. We're going to call it C. And then we can plug in what we know into the Pythagorean theorem. I always suggest to write the formula every time you use it. And so I'm going to do that. C is 16. I'm going to plug that in there. It's 16 squared. These two right here are A and B. It doesn't matter which one is which. I always put the variable first. That's what we're used to seeing, and so it's what people are most comfortable with. So x squared and then the square root of 122 squared. And so some things to point out here. We can square using the calculator. You can always use the calculator. But whenever I have a squared and a square root, those are opposite operations. And so this squared and this square root will cancel. So whenever you square a square root, it's just going to be that number left over. And then I'm going to continue solving this. I'll subtract 122. And the way to get rid of a squared, we have to solve this for x. We want to know what x squared is. The way to get rid of that squared is to square root both sides. So we're going to square root 134. And you're going to get a decimal. And so you can leave it as root 134 if you want. What did the directions say? Simplest radical form. We'll just leave it like that. I'm happy with that for now. So let me do another one. I'm always going to identify which is the hypotenuse first. That's going to be C. Hypotenuse is across from this right angle. So in this case, x is my C. So when I plug in, I'm going to plug x in for C. And then 5 and 8 are going to be A and B. It doesn't matter which is which. You can just plug them both in. And then I'm going to solve this for x. So I get 25, 64. And then the last thing I'm going to do is square root both sides to find x to be the square root of 89. If you put that in the calculator, it'll be a decimal, so we can just leave it like that for now. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause right now, and I want you to do number 3 here. Pause, solve for x for number 3, and then press play and watch the answer. So hopefully you got x to be 2. Root 14 is the hypotenuse. Remember that a squared and a square root cancel each other out. So we're left with 10. We're left with 14. To get rid of the squared on x, we square root because they cancel each other out, and we get x to be 2. So I'm going to skip this one because we have some more to do. If you do have questions about these, please ask. As always, I'm happy to help. So we want to use Pythagorean theorem in another way now, and we want to use it to determine what type of triangle we have. A right triangle we know has one 90-degree angle. An obtuse triangle is a triangle that has one angle that is greater than 90 degrees, an obtuse angle. And then an acute triangle has three angles that are less than 90 degrees. They're all acute angles, smaller than 90, of course bigger than 0. And we can use the Pythagorean theorem to help us out with that. We know that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared when we have a right triangle. When we have an obtuse triangle, we don't have an equality, we have an inequality. My c squared side is going to be bigger, greater than my a squared plus b squared side. If I have an acute triangle, my c squared side is going to be less than, it's going to be smaller than a squared plus b squared. So we can plug in our side lengths into the Pythagorean theorem and simplify, and we can see which side is bigger. If they're equal, it's a right triangle. If c squared is bigger, it's an obtuse triangle. If c squared is smaller, it's an acute triangle. And so let's give a couple of those a try. I like to put a question mark after a squared plus b squared because we're trying to figure out what goes here. Is it a greater than sign, a less than sign, an equal sign? We'll need to know which one of these is the biggest number because that's the one we should plug in for C. 170 is a square root of 170 is the biggest one, so I'm going to plug it in for C. And so I can plug the other ones in for A and B. And then I'm just going to simplify both sides. So I'm going to square everything. Remember the square root squared just cancels those things out. So once we have both sides simplified, we're going to ask ourselves which side is, or how is this right side that came from c squared, how is it compared to the left side, a squared plus b squared? If they're equal, it's a right triangle. If c squared is bigger, it's a obtuse. If c squared is smaller, it's acute. So if we look at c squared, it is bigger, and therefore this is an obtuse triangle. That means that this angle across from my biggest side is greater than 90 degrees. It's bigger than 90. So let me show you one more. I'm always going to start with the relationship. I'm going to put a question mark there because I'm trying to figure out what is it. Is it equals? Is it less than? Is it greater than? Which one is it? How do these two sides relate? I need to figure out which side is my biggest. If I have a square root and I don't know how big it is exactly, you could just put it in the calculator. Square root of 122 in decimal form is 11.04. And so that means that 12 is my largest side, so I'm going to plug 12 in for C. And then I can simplify both sides. So I get. So once I have them simplified, I'm gonna look at my right side. I want to always refer to c squared and see if it's equal, bigger, or less than my other side. If c squared is equal, it's right. If c squared is bigger, it's obtuse, and if c squared is smaller, it's acute. I can see that my c squared side is smaller than the other side, and so this is an acute triangle. That means that all the angles in this triangle are less than 90 degrees. So I'm going to do one more. In this case, root 15 is going to be our biggest side, so I'm going to make that C. Over here we have 2 times root 3. This is multiplication. If you don't know how to square that thing, on Desmos, in parentheses, actually let me pull it up. We could just do this on the calculator. So I'm going to put in parentheses 2 root 3. Is that what we had? Yep. Close that parentheses and then square it, and you'll get an answer. So instead of maybe making a mistake on how to square this, just make sure you put it in parentheses, the whole thing in parentheses, and that turns into 12. The square root here and the square root cancel. Square root cancel. I get both sides to be 15, therefore this is a right triangle. So I want you to pause. I want you to try this last one. So pause, try this last one, then press play and check the answer. So 257 should be your biggest side. So that's going to go in for C. And when you simplify both of these sides, again, you can put this right into Desmos, 4 root 11 squared. Just make sure you use those parentheses, just like this. And when you simplify this side, C is the same as my a squared plus b squared. Therefore, this is a right triangle. So as always, if you have questions, make sure that you ask. You need to do some practice. In fact, I have a few that I want you to do. There's going to be some questions that pop up on the screen that I want you to answer related to these 4 questions. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. Make sure you answer those questions so you can get full credit. Ask for help if you need it, and good luck.